Welcome to the story about my vacation to Paris in May 2016. In this 11-part series, which includes this way too long intro, I'll cover how I prepared for the trip along with each of the 8 days as well as my takeaways and lessons. I originally split this up into separate chapters, intending to release each one on their respective 4-year anniversaries before realizing how stupid it is to have a bunch of rushed, poorly produced short videos. So I decided to release one slightly less poorly produced video on the 4-year anniversary of the day I returned from the trip, May 15th. So why am I doing this series? As you can probably tell, 2020 is the year I've dived deep into visual storytelling. The first third of the year I focused on visuals, and now I'm shifting towards storytelling. Plus, I captured nearly 1,100 images and videos while in Paris, and would love to resurrect these visuals so they can live lives beyond sitting in rarely visited digital photo albums. That leads to the technical stuff. I captured everything with my iPhone 6, so while I will output these videos in 4K, the video quality I captured is at best 1080p, and images are at most 3264 pixels wide. But image resolution is not the problem. The real problem is that I wasn't the filmmaker in 2016 that I am now, so please forgive me in advance for some of the obnoxiously fast panning shots and the far too many vertical videos since Snapchat was still a thing and TikTok was not yet a thing. But as much as I've learned about cameras over the past couple of years, I'll try to use this series to prove that filmmaking is all about story. From mid-2015 to mid-2016, I worked as a junior-level interaction designer at a pharmaceutical marketing agency. This is the back of my bald head at my desk. And yes, taking a picture of the back of your own head is very difficult. In January 2016, I had a conversation with my manager where she said I could take a vacation. I don't remember the nature of this conversation, but this was likely because I blitzed through the holiday season without taking a single day off while basically everyone else in the office went on vacation. By February, I had made up my mind that I was going to Paris. So why Paris? I admit it's a bit cliche, but honestly, if I had to guess, Paris probably tops the list of desired destinations for those who've never traveled internationally overseas. So it's likely that I simply gave in to the over-romanticization of the city through pop culture, which is probably the same reason I studied French as my foreign language requirement in school. So in the early morning hours of March 1st, 2016, just after midnight, I purchased the vacation package. You might be curious about the cost of this trip, so here's a screenshot of the confirmation email, and holy cow, I don't recall how much of this purchase was just taxes and fees. Anyway, the package included the Air France flight from San Francisco to Paris on the night of Saturday, May 7th, the 3-star hotel near the Paris airport I would stay at between the nights of May 8th and May 13th, the flight from Paris to Amsterdam on May 14th where I would lay over, and the flight from Amsterdam to San Francisco on May 15th. The afternoon of the day I bought this package, I went across town and spent seemingly all day at the post office going through the tedious process of getting a passport. Thankfully, these things only need to get renewed once every 10 years, or something like that. For the rest of this, I had a long-winded detailed timeline of minor things I bought for this trip, but for the sake of your sanity and my sanity, I edited down to this. Deep breath. On March 15th, I bought my luggage. On April 1st, I bought a travel kit that included holders for a toothbrush, razor, and soap, and on April 15th, I bought electrical outlet adapters. That's enough of the painfully uninteresting pre-trip stuff. I'm not exactly the nervous type, but nerves are unavoidable as you approach the airport for what will be the first overseas international flight of your life and the first solo flight of your life. My flight departed SFO at 9:05 p.m. San Francisco time and landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport sometime around the scheduled arrival time of 4:45 p.m. Paris time. Despite staying awake for the entire nearly 11-hour flight, the only two things I remember from it are watching The Good Dinosaur and the strange look of disgust the flight attendant gave me after I turned down champagne. In the United States, turning things down is as simple as saying no thank you, but this moment reminded me that etiquette differs between cultures. After grabbing my luggage, I went and got some euros from an ATM and headed out the door to the pickup area. This hectic scene of passengers with luggage popping into and out of cars somehow quickly hit me with the reality that I'm alone halfway across the world, and that I'm going to have to figure out how to get around. So I decided this would be a great first time to try Uber. Okay, so a better first time would have been to try it at home where the stakes of getting around aren't nearly as high, because in San Francisco, the worst case scenario of getting stranded is that I have to walk across town to get home. But in unfamiliar territory, I didn't really have a choice other than to leave navigation up to someone who actually knows his way around the airport. Thanks, Sammy. After Sammy dropped me off at my hotel, seen here, the real frustration began. The clerk at the check-in desk initially couldn't find my reservation in the system and even insinuated I didn't have one. I pulled up the confirmation email on my phone and handed it to her. During the seemingly eternal agonizing wait for her to locate my reservation on her computer, I understandably began to wonder whether I got scammed and would need to quickly find an emergency option. Keep in mind I purchased the reservation back in March when this type of package was available and affordable, so I had my doubts anything close to this value and availability would exist at that moment. She eventually found my reservation and I headed to my room to discover that I forgot to pack my electrical outlet adapters, which of course meant I couldn't charge anything, including my exhausted phone. So as much as someone who got off a nearly 11-hour flight without sleeping would enjoy putting his head against the pillow, I had to take a trip into town. On this Sunday evening, my Google Maps search for electronic stores gave me only one store that I knew would sell adapters and just might remain open long enough for me to get there before it closed. This is one of the few situations in which a €30 Uber trip is justified. Thank you, Envir. The only thing I remember about our conversation before dozing off for the majority of this ride is that Envir is from Brazil. Not surprisingly, throughout my week here, I'd learned that meeting people from around the globe is the norm here. Upon exiting the Uber with the second wind that my card app provided me, I was immediately enthralled by how, air quote, extra this place is. I mean that in a good way. As someone who grew up playing SimCity and as someone who took both architecture and city and regional planning electives in college, Paris fascinated me with its artistic approach to city building. I'm talking everything from the layout of the city to the care put into constructing buildings that have even the most basic functions. Just look at the place from which I purchased the electrical outlet adapter I came into town for. Publicis drugstore. A drugstore. Look at this and compare it to a typical Walgreens, CVS, or Rite Aid. Of course, the nearby arch caught my eye. It was the first thing I noticed when my Uber pulled up, but I couldn't concern myself with it until after I got that crucial adapter. I've seen images of this arch before, I just didn't remember where. At the time, I also didn't know the name of it. After taking in some of the Champs-Élysées atmosphere, I headed over to the arch to do what obnoxious tourists do. The Arc de Triomphe honors those who fought and died for France in the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. Thanks, Wikipedia. Regarding the names of all French victories and generals inscribed on its inner and outer surfaces, I actually captured halfway decent iPhone images. Considering the level of detail on every square foot, I can understand why this took 30 years to build. At this point, my phone's nearly drained battery gave me a sense of urgency that prevented me from visually documenting the rest of the night to the extent I wanted, but I did snap a couple of images of this movie theater before finding a convenient dinner option nearby. Remember how I mentioned this place was a bit extra? This convenient dinner option fascinated me almost as much as the surrounding neighborhood. As someone who made his money designing apps and websites, this restaurant caught my attention with food ordering kiosks as well as its social gathering atmosphere and its extensive baked goods selection. If you haven't yet figured out what I meant by calling this place extra, in a good way, look no further than Paris's ability to glamorize the largest and most basic food chain in the world. This is when my phone battery died. Here I am, halfway across the world, alone in a major city. In the mind of an inexperienced traveler, this is enough to generate a bit of panic for the brief moment before reminding yourself that this current crisis is very much a 2016 problem, and that decades, centuries of world travelers got along just fine without smartphones. So I simply walked into a nearby train station, grabbed this physical map, and followed the red line to the blue line back to the airport the way all pre-smartphone travelers did once upon a time. This was the easy part. I got back to the airport after midnight and walked up to the shuttle area only to learn that the last shuttle back to the hotels leaves at midnight. Of course, Uber couldn't save me because that required a functioning phone, so I figured no problem. The hotel isn't that far away, I'll just walk. Apparently no walking path leading out of the airport exists. Unfortunately, I did not know this until after probably 2 to 3 hours of wandering around the airport on foot trying to find my way out. The Paris airport has absolutely no walkways that will enable someone on foot to walk out. The only way out are through tunnels and overpasses only vehicles could access. After hours of walking from terminal to terminal in the middle of the night within a completely foreign airport, I finally found my savior. Parked outside of Terminal 2 sat a taxi driver. At this time of night, I don't know why he would be working considering the basically zero signs of life around the terminals, but he was happy to give me a ride to the place I pointed to on my hotel brochure, and extra happy that I gave him 30 euros for a 15-euro trip. His overjoyed reaction to my 100% tip almost made up for the hours of frustration I had just gone through, but I don't think he understood what kind of hero he was in that moment. And yes, those 30 emergency euros I got from the ATM the moment I flew in certainly came in handy. I hated this night. I really did. In hindsight, I documented some great memories and can laugh at this experience since it didn't result in any permanent damage. And lastly, I can't conclude the story of my first night in Paris without this fun fact featuring my favorite childhood show. My first night in Paris was May 8, 2016. The Simpsons aired an episode titled To Courier with Love, in which the family takes a discounted vacation to Paris. This episode aired May 8, 2016. I didn't need to wake up on day 2 determined to make it suck less than the night before, because I knew that day 2 sucking more would be nearly impossible. I was, however, determined to knock off every first-time Paris visitor's main bucket list item. One way in which I benefited from the day 1 debacle that forced me to learn the train system is that I now had an efficient daily commute from my hotel into town. Take the shuttle to the airport train station, grab the train tickets I need for the day, and take the train into the heart of town. On my first train ride into town, I didn't know which stop would be the best to get off at. Having heard the name Notre Dame before, I decided Saint Michel Notre Dame station was a good place to begin my journey, because as suggested in the background and preparation video, pop culture heavily influenced my decision to come to the city in the first place. I immediately knew I picked the perfect stop the moment I exited the train station. This festive street corner felt like what I always imagined Paris would feel like. After taking in the atmosphere of the street corner, my eyes locked onto the larger-than-life structure I had previously seen pictures of somewhere. I would soon realize the city is full of those things. So, what do you do when you encounter one of these structures? This, of course. And just like the arch from day 1, the level of detail on every square foot of this cathedral's facade amazed me. It's no surprise that Notre Dame acts as a social gathering place for many of the city's residents and visitors. Here's a brief look away from the cathedral onto some of the surrounding city. But as we look back on Notre Dame, I can't figure out how to best describe the feeling of an ominous sky backdrop to a piece of French Gothic architecture. So I'm just going to let the images speak for themselves and allow you to feel what you want to feel. As much as I wanted to stay and take in more, there are only so many hours in a day, so it was time to take a walk. On my way out, I couldn't help but notice the city's relationship to the river. Paris seems to have a way of making its rivers part of the city in ways most US cities I visited do not. Anyway, I made the Louvre my next checkpoint and understandably got distracted at every city block along the way. When I arrived at the Louvre, I didn't go inside, partially because I didn't know where the actual entrance was, and partially because I had a bigger priority that day and wanted to dedicate an entire separate day for this museum. No, seriously, I actually thought the entrance to the museum had to be anywhere but the glass pyramid. Okay, May 9th, 2016, Raymond, the entrance is right there. You literally took a picture of it, but didn't know because you're too easily distracted by every cool statue you come across. Speaking of distractions, here are some more cool shots of the area surrounding the Louvre before I continued my journey. After crossing the river, I wandered into a neighborhood and briefly got slightly lost. Then I looked around this corner. There it stood in its larger-than-life stature, standing 1,063 feet tall. That is 324 meters. This is how excited I felt at that particular moment. Okay, in all seriousness, my first in-person encounter with the Eiffel Tower went something like this. By this point, my achy feet began to let me know they'd just hauled both my body and my backpack on minimally padded shoes across exclusively hard surfaces for the past hour or so. But I didn't come this far to not get as close as possible to one of the most iconic structures in the world. This is the underbelly of the tower. I'm sure somewhere around here there's an elevator that goes to the top, but don't get excited. I didn't go to the top because throughout this trip I avoided most long lines. However, if you want to get excited about something, you could buy snacks at the bottom of the tower. See? Anyway, I walked out to the State Park lawn and found a spot to rest my feet while taking the standard, "Look at me, I'm in front of the Eiffel Tower, aren't I so special?" show-off pics for Instagram. Can we take a moment to realize how much social media influences how we experience life? At this moment, if someone forced me to go home, I would have been satisfied because I saw the tower, walked under it, and took a selfie in front of it. Now it's time to absorb whatever else I can within my windows of remaining daylight and patience. After absorbing a bit of the neighborhood atmosphere, I picked up some snacks at the store. And since it's France, I picked up some bread from this bakery. Before heading back to the hotel, I took the second most Paris photo ever. And then I took the most Paris photo ever. Don't get too excited, I didn't actually go into the palace. This day would be short. I woke up that morning not feeling particularly well. Remember that bread from the bakery the evening before? It was some of the driest bread I've ever eaten. More importantly, it wasn't sitting very well with me. This is my way of saying I felt like a champ for even dragging myself out of bed to salvage some of the day. Here's blah feeling Raymond on his way to Versailles. Throughout the train trip, my stomach felt progressively worse, and I was convinced enough that I was going to be sick that I got off for fresh air well before my intended Versailles stop. I stopped at the first station in the small town of Versailles. I paced back and forth through this neighborhood before my stomach finally calmed down enough for me to focus my mental energy on absorbing the atmosphere of this little French town. I knew I probably wouldn't experience France's countryside on this trip, but this was at least a half break from the hustle and bustle of Paris. Then it was back on the train. Once you get to the train station in Versailles and begin wandering around, much like Paris, you won't find a shortage of interesting architecture en route to your main destination. But Versailles isn't a large town, which means the palace parking lot is right around the corner from the train station. This is especially welcome on this stormy day in which my feet were soaked throughout. Physical comfort was just not in the cards for me. It was time for me to lug my rain-soaked socks and feet out of here, but not before snapping some more images of Hotel de Ville, the last of which I'm still quite fond of to this day. I woke up this morning feeling much better than I did the previous morning, so I grabbed a chocolate chip muffin from the bakery at the airport train station, because just like slot machines in Vegas, nearly every building in Paris seems to have a bakery. Now I'll just eat this muffin on the train, and the station is closed. Thankfully, the airport bus station is at the northwest side of this building. This is how I got into town. What normally would have been a 45-minute commute into town took 2 hours on this day. However, a very attractive blonde woman from Poland who was in town for business made the extended commute worth it by initiating conversation with me that lasted throughout the bus ride. She even saved me 10 euros by swiping me into the train station after we got to our bus stop. This young, feminine distraction is probably the reason I have no photos or videos between the airport and this mall. You know you're in great company when you forget to reflexively reach for your phone. Anyway, this mall is where the Châtelet-Les Halles train station sits. Of course, I had to take a lap because few things illustrate contemporary culture of a cosmopolitan city better than its malls. It will irritate some of you to know that I didn't indulge in much non-McDonald's food during this trip, and I will explain in the conclusion chapter why I made that decision. But here's one of the few times I did. Like American mall food, I'm certain that French mall food is engineered to look and smell irresistible. In my hand beneath the pink and black branding, you see a dog wrapped in a cheesy fried pretzel bun. I repeat, a cheesy fried pretzel bun. Take notes, American malls. Anyway, here's some cool stuff I snapped on the way from my contemporary cultural experience to what will be a Renaissance cultural experience. Indeed, another stormy day, which gave me extra incentive to find the entrance this time since I didn't come here on this day to hang out outside. Let's warm up with an Egyptian sculpture before heading upstairs to see Venus de Milo and company. Now admit it, many of you probably only know about Venus de Milo because of The Simpsons. Unlike myself, you avoided the fine arts major, so you didn't have the same humanities and art history professors who forced me to learn about the stuff in this museum. That being said, there is something a little extra enjoyable about coming face to face with the real-life physical sculptures and paintings you've seen in textbooks. Alright, let's check out the paintings upstairs. My face says everything. I had reached Renaissance heaven. But as much as I'd love to stay and soak in the aura of arguably the world's most famous piece of creative work, the museum has other stuff. The Louvre is definitely worth dedicating a half day to if that's all you have remaining following a morning full of unforeseen detours. Thankfully for me, the return trains operated as normal, as illustrated by this amusing graphic on one of the doors. Also, before I bolted for the train station, here were a couple of cute pups testing the patience of their dog mom. On this day I experienced Paris's unmatched rainy day charm. I woke up this morning without much of a plan, but recalled a time in which I briefly researched the University of Paris as a possible undergrad destination. So I headed to that area of town to just explore the streets of that neighborhood without thinking too hard. This would give my mind at least a day of freedom from the burden of rigid bucket list items, as well as walk the streets like I'm a citizen getting out for some fresh air. After wandering in and around campuses, I headed around the corner to the Panthéon, mainly to see what it is since the building looks interesting. And so did the area around it. But seriously, look at this thing. And that's just the detail on the outside. The religious experience of architectural design continues the moment you step foot in the door, reminding you why meticulously detailed concrete structures that took 30 years to construct are quite common in Paris. My only problem with this place is that I paid extra euros for a roof tour that got cancelled due to inclement weather, and our group didn't get refunded, so this second level view is the highest we climbed. Upon stepping outside, I entered the crowd of nearby people in the area taking cover from the aforementioned inclement weather. The rest of the day was pretty wet, but Paris's rainy day charm somewhat made up for my soaked shoes and socks. Still, listen to the rain in the garden across the river from the Notre-Dame Cathedral. It gives me a greater appreciation for the shots I captured now that I am able to relive them in a warm, dry, indoor environment. Sticking with the garden theme, I wandered over to another one, this one in the square of St. Jacques Tower. If you like birds and blooms, you'll like this place. I eventually had enough of the rain and headed indoors where I'd experience a brief calm before a different storm. Remember early in the day I mentioned wanting to use this day to walk around like a citizen? Well, now I got the most sobering of Paris life experiences, as this is the first time I failed to avoid rush hour during my return trip.
Ce train pour destination Mitriclé.
Avancez au maximum dans les couloirs, s'il vous plaît.
Merci d'emprunter les couloirs au maximum. Merci de ne pas gêner la fermeture des portes.
Kudos to those who endure this storm of people twice every single day. At least the weather for the next day appeared promising, especially since I needed it to cooperate specifically for the outdoor plans I had for my final day. Friday the 13th, May 2016. These tasty croissants sat free for the taking in the hotel lobby. The weather appeared that it would cooperate as expected. This part of the world really likes its bread. As I munched on one of those flaky, buttery puffs of goodness, I mapped out my ideal day, which included trips to Disneyland Paris, the cemetery, and the Eiffel Tower at sunset. But don't get too excited. I won't drag this on any further before admitting I gave up on the Disneyland Paris idea since I wasn't confident I would make it back before sunset, and the cemetery was closed. So this would turn into another wandering day, at least until sunset approached. My exploration began with a pass through this public park that sits within a bustling traffic circle. Public works of art tend to catch my eye, and so does a vibrant city scene. This place had both. As I continued to wander, I passed through a train station that would capture the imagination of any architecture nerd coming through on foot. You know you're in Paris when your only intention for a visit to a particular train station is to experience its cultural vibe. Here are some more wandering images before I crossed the Seine and followed it to just beyond the Pont de la Tournelle bridge. Here at the Porte de Montebello, I did what I'm best at, thinking about life until those thoughts get consumed by eternal loneliness. Here comes a welcome distraction from my thoughts. After snapping some more pics near Notre Dame, I headed to the tower. I arrived early enough to take some pre-sunset images. Just as the usual contemplative, somber Raymond thoughts trickled into my head, I found another distraction: a vendor selling waffles. I got what I came here for on this day: seeing Paris at night. It was my last non-negotiable bucket list item of the trip. After leaving the tower, I snapped a series of mundane photos for my personal memories to document some of the everyday things I experienced, such as waiting for a return train and what the airport train station looks like upon my arrival back from town. I woke up with an annoying sore throat. This worried me because it was there the night before, but the night before it was still minor enough for me to hold out hope that it was just temporarily irritated and not that I was coming down with something. Unfortunately, I'm not at home. I'm in a hotel that expires in a few hours, and I have a flight I need to catch in a couple of hours, so I can't just lay in bed. These are the images I took of the hotel on the way out. When I got to the airport, I nearly missed the last call because I apparently sat at the wrong gate. After just barely making it into the line on time, I squeezed onto by far the most turbulent flight I ever took. Thankfully, we were only in the air for 40 minutes, but don't let the stillness of these images fool you. It felt like we were in a flying 8-ball that someone picked up and shook for 40 minutes straight for mere amusement. After we somehow landed in one piece, the airport shops immediately impressed me. Those who know me know I'm a chocolate connoisseur. The sight of a Belgian chocolate store at the airport put a twinkle in my eye. The moment I stepped outside, I knew I had probably been developing an illness. It didn't help that I was way underdressed for the cold, gusty wind whipping through Amsterdam that day, but the efficiency in which the chill shot through my body suddenly made me aware of the body aches I acutely suffered. I checked into my hotel room before heading immediately back to the airport to meet my friend Marlies from my collegiate track and field days. We took the train into town and walked to the scenic canals. This is our awkward attempt at a selfie before giving up and handing the phone to a passerby who put her finger in the shot as her signature. After catching up with Marlies for a bit longer, including her getting photo credit for snapping these shoe shots, she had a dinner to get to, so I was on my own to explore, basically as long as I could stand this frigid weather. After heading back to the canals to explore them further, I noticed a line wrapped around at least a couple of buildings that led into what is apparently the Anne Frank house upon a closer look. Of course, I did not have the patience or physical condition to stand in that line, so I found the Anne Frank statue and just took a picture of it. Like other major European cities, Amsterdam is worth its own separate trip and not intended to be experienced to its fullest during a brief layover. For dinner, I went to this restaurant, bought a plate of chicken and french fries, and made my way back to the hotel. I'm not a fan of 11-hour flights. I'm especially not a fan of 11-hour flights in which I'm not feeling my best. If I was 50% sure I had the flu yesterday, I'm 95% sure now. I woke up feeling miserable, and this is what my throat looked like. Rewind a day or two to some of the overcrowded locations on my trip and you'll understand why 2020 became the year of social distancing. At the airport, I returned to the Belgian chocolate shop. I wanted to bring some chocolate back to my coworkers, so I splurged on as much as I felt I could fit in my already tightly packed luggage. The flight from Amsterdam was as miserable as expected considering my physical condition. Strangely, I felt much more dizzy and nauseated while sitting down than standing up, so throughout most of this 11-hour flight, I actually stood up in the back with this view. I figured if I could stay on my feet for the entirety of those 8-hour shifts at the customer service jobs I had when I was younger, I could stand up for most of this flight. Or at least until I'm required to sit for this landing.
Dames en heren, we naderen de luchthaven van San Francisco. U wordt verzocht om de handbagage en...
Traveling is a great teacher of life. It forces you to budget, plan, and adapt when things don't go as expected. But much like life itself, in traveling you set goals and most of the actual experiences of those goals are the journeys required to get to them. As a track and field athlete, it's spending countless hours almost every day for years to compete in an event that lasts just seconds or minutes. For the average traveler, it's saving for months, diligently planning a schedule, sitting in a plane all day, and riding a series of car shares, buses, and your own 2 feet into and throughout a city just to experience something for a brief moment, whether it's an arch, a tower, or a painting. I learned the pros and cons of solo travel. The obvious Raymond con is loneliness, but this is no different for traveling Raymond than it is for non-traveling Raymond. When going solo, if you get into any trouble, you're on your own to deal with it. This can be especially challenging if you have little traveling experience. On the pro side of going solo, you could document as much as possible, you don't need to negotiate plans with anyone, and you can do everything at your own pace, such as walking your preferred speed or getting out of bed whenever you feel like it. As someone who didn't realize he would eventually evolve into a visual storyteller, I learned you could document with what you have. I captured all 1,000 plus images and video clips with an iPhone 6. Would I rather have documented this trip with my Canon 90D, getting 4K video and high-resolution RAW files of the Mona Lisa? Absolutely. But still, what's important is the story you create and that you preserve your memories the best way you can. If I could go back to Paris, I certainly would knock off more outdoor bucket list items such as Disneyland Paris. However, I would prioritize more thorough experiences of locations I simply captured from the exterior, such as going to the top of the Eiffel Tower, going inside of Notre Dame, and taking a tour of the Palace of Versailles. I'd also force myself to indulge in some more of the local food. In the Day 4 chapter, I promised to explain my decision to eat mostly McDonald's throughout the trip. The reason is simple. It gave me more time to document. McDonald's tastes the same no matter where in the world you eat it, so you won't get any surprises. That makes it a quick, reliable meal you can enjoy without dedicating the hours you would otherwise need in order to truly indulge in an international restaurant experience. In future travel, I probably won't linger. That is, I don't believe I want to plan many vacations that last beyond a few days. Since I'm not a veteran traveler, I could be wrong here, but my week-long trip leads me to believe that the vacation sweet spot is around 3 days. I've heard from others who've gone on vacation to exotic locations that they always get bored after 2 days because they run out of things to do. Now, while Paris certainly always has new things to do, I accomplished the bulk of my bucket list items within my first 3 full days, and part of me was actually over the trip and ready to go home by that point. In hindsight, ending the trip there probably saves me from the terrible flu I picked up toward the end of the trip, which leads me to the final lesson I'll share. Take your travel health seriously. There are few worse things than suffering from the flu during vacation, especially on an 11-hour flight. For future trips, I'll strongly consider getting the flu shot in addition to any other necessary shots weeks in advance. I'll end this long conclusion with a bit of advice to first-time Paris goers. I took French in junior college but didn't use any of it. Not just because I forgot 95% of what I learned, but because honestly, almost everyone in Paris speaks English. However, the clerk at a Parisian store told me locals appreciated if foreigners learned merci and bonjour. Bon voyage, mes amis. I probably butchered that.